I'll share once you've done the intro.
No problem.
Okay.
Hi, everybody that's just coming on board. Tonight is the first week of Hacking Countermeasures 2026, where Simon Jones, who you can see on screen at the moment, and we'll be putting up the slides pretty soon, will be teaching you all about the introduction to hacking countermeasures. Now, as always with our free short courses, we will just wait 2 or 3 minutes for everybody to come in. So we'll actually kick off at around about 2 minutes past 7 or so. So just in the meantime, I can see people are already saying g'day. Say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, and tell us where you're coming from. Anything you want to chat about is great. And we'll kick off in a couple of minutes. We'll just go quiet for a minute. Thanks. Okay, it looks like quite a lot of people are here. My name's Shane Murphy, and I'd like to formally welcome everyone to Charles Sturt University and IT Masters free short course, Hacking Countermeasures 2026, and our first week of this session, which is on an introduction to hacking countermeasures. It's going to be presented by the illustrious Simon Jones, who is here and ready to go. But other than that, a few little things just to remember for those of you who may not have been to our courses before. Remember to switch your chat to everyone so that we can all see and you can chat back and say hello. If you've got questions that you really want Simon to answer of a technical nature related to the course, don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Open up the Q&A in a separate thing. At the bottom of your screen, it'll probably be in the More section when you look at your little system down there. Don't use the raise hand icon because we don't actually use that, just so I'd let you know. Other than that, be nice to each other. Everybody always is, but it's always worthwhile saying, I hope you're doing well wherever you are. One of the things I should mention about this course is that there is some relationship to the Certified Ethical Hacker certification. I don't know whether we'll necessarily refer to it directly, but Hacking Countermeasures itself, our Charles Sturt subject on it was based around CEH originally many moons ago. And I just mentioned that because that is something else that IT Masters actually do these days. We do provide access to some of the self-learned materials and the exams and things for things like CompTIA and Certified Ethical Hacking and some other things that we're about to announce in the next few weeks. So you can find them in the ITM store. That's our advertising part for the moment anyway. As you know, we do these free short courses because A, we love to teach. B, we hope that if you've been to some of our courses that you might in the future decide that you want to actually enroll in some of our subjects and or some of our degree courses, and we'd love to have you along. Other than that, though, I think most of the things I've covered, and it's over to you, Simon. How are you tonight?
I'm well, thank you, Shane. Yeah, good, ready to roll. It's been a busy week, and yeah, it's first time I'm doing this short course, but I've been doing the Hacking Countermeasures regular subject now for a number of years, so the content's something near and dear to my heart. So yeah, looking forward to it. Can see there's a lot of different locations all over the world, so an illustrious crew.
As always, we have people from everywhere from Ghana to Melbourne.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. All right, I'll share my screen. We should kick off now.
Absolutely. Let's
Great.
go.
Give me 1 second. I'll just share the
I will just try and
slides.
answer Mohammed's question, which is, will we be able to get CPEs for CISP? I'm really not sure. I think that's something you're probably got to ask the CISP people. We certainly don't. It's not part of what we do with CISP, although we are getting a bit closer to the ISC2 people. So in about a month, we might be able to answer that question better. So
Yeah, I might be able to add some information now. I'm a CISSP. I'll get to all of that in a second, but the webinars are normally considered 1 CPE per hour, I think, and I don't see any reason why this wouldn't be considered a single CPE for a 1 hour presentation. Certainly, you can check the ISC2 documentation for clarification, but from memory, I've been submitting CPEs for a number of years, and yeah, normally a 1 hour webinar would be 1 CPE. So I imagine that's going to apply in this case, but hopefully that's true and I haven't led you astray. All right. Yeah, look, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to be looking at a couple of weeks of content which is derived from the broader hacking countermeasures subject, which is a subject that's part of the Masters and certificate curriculum at CSU via IT Masters. I'll just kick straight into the slides. It's going to be a combination of me doing a fair bit of talking. There will be some practical demonstrations, not so much tonight. I have a few extra things to put up, but we've got a little bit of sort of academic theory to get through tonight. Next week and the week after, though, there will be a little bit more demonstrations of practical techniques, and there'll be videos posted of those to sort of watch on their own as well. Yeah, it's a combination of theory, a bit of practice, maybe some things you can try at home, and we'll cover a fairly broad spectrum of a bunch of topics from the broader hacking countermeasures curriculum. Who am I? Simon, that's me. An old photo. I was a bit hairier in those days and had more hair in my head. I've been in technology about 30 years. Been working in the banking industry for a lot of that. Just recently finished up with the ANZ Bank. For those not in Australia, it's one of our big four. I've also been at the NAB previously and just started working with AGL, which is an energy provider in Australia. Yeah, been a security architect for about the last 10 or 12 years. Did my Masters of Information Systems Security through IT Masters back before it was a Masters of Cybersecurity. That's a fairly recent term, same sort of curriculum, but it was a few years back. Finished that in about 2015, and I've been working in the as a security professional since around about that time. Along the way, I've also done a CISSP, Certified Information Systems Professional, Security Professional. The CEH, which as Shane mentioned, is a separate industry cert which this subject was originally derived from. The full hacking countermeasures subject is not completely aligned anymore. It has deviated, but it does owe its roots and still uses the text from the CEH, which is a certificate provided by the EC Council. So did that quite a number of years ago. Also, the GIAC Certified Incident Handler was something I did along my journey to getting my master's. I've been mentoring with these fine folks now for a little over 10 years. I do the hacking countermeasure subject and another subject called professional systems security as well. That's me. As Shane mentioned, this short course has a the parent subject, ITE516 Hacking Countermeasures, runs in the summer trimester, which is just finished, and the first trimester of the year, which is just starting. They're the topics that the full subject covers: access control, information gathering, network attacks and network security, web attacks, threat intelligence, which is a recent addition to the subject, cryptography, the art and science of making information secret and keeping it free from corruption, malware, malicious software, wireless security, and cloud security. So that's the full curriculum, and there's a link there. I think Lil might have posted as well a link to the handbook for the full subject. We'll be covering a couple of those topics tonight, not all of them. Oh, sorry, this short course, not all of them. Tonight, we're going to be doing a bit of security fundamentals, so some terminology, some concepts, principles, the kind of groundwork that any fundamental security subject or course will start with. So assuming that you obviously all have an interest in this, but many of you may not have come across those terms before. So I want to make sure we have a decent ground foundation laid so that when I start throwing words around like vulnerability and threat and risk, etc., you know exactly what we're talking about. We'll also touch on the first part of the hacking process, as it's known, which is the footprinting or reconnaissance. So we'll talk a bit more about that shortly, but that'll round us out for tonight. And you can see up there on the top which parts of the broader curriculum that covers. Next week, we go a bit deeper. We go down a level from simple reconnaissance into network scanning, host scanning, and actual access into systems. So how an attacker might use the information they've gathered during the reconnaissance and the scanning phase in order to access a target systems. And the subject is hacking countermeasures. So it's not just about the hacking or the attacking part, it's also looking at how these techniques can be thwarted, how we can stop them from occurring in the first place, how we can detect that they've occurred, and how they can be responded to. And also the message throughout this is, and we'll get to it shortly, it's about, as a defender, it's about thinking like the attacker. If you don't know what an attacker will see if they start performing reconnaissance on you, then you don't know what it is you're trying to defend. So the reconnaissance and scanning is something the attackers will do, but it's also something defenders can and should do in order to make sure they understand what it is they're exposing to the broader world, to potential attackers out there. Week 3, we'll touch on malware, malicious software. So we'll look at the sort of broad spectrum of malware and the history of malware, and we'll look more closely at the type of malware we see very commonly today, and that's ransomware. We'll also look at the network as a means of attack and also defense. So the types of attacks that the network will bring to our environments, things like DDoS, volumetric DDoS attacks, where attackers can make our networks unresponsive by flooding them with data, and the kind of defensive techniques that network architects and security practitioners can use to make these networks resilient, so the systems connecting to the networks can withstand these attacks and aren't corrupted or disrupted as a result. Excuse me. In the final week, we'll sort of branch out a bit, something that doesn't exist in the main subject, but is a really interesting topic, and that's about security testing and running a secure operation. So a lot of those first few topics is more about, how would you build and design networks and systems to be resilient against attacks? So what are the techniques attackers will use, and how do I configure the systems that I have so that those attacks either won't work or are severely limited in how effective they are? But in an organization where you have a mature security function or security practice, it's not just about building systems, it's about running systems as well. So when systems are live and they're providing business value for your bank or whichever organization we're talking about, it's really about how do we make sure they stay secure day to day, week to week, month to month. So we'll look at a few of the techniques that operational security teams use in order to make sure their systems are safe and detect if things are going wrong and potentially respond to those if they do. As I mentioned earlier, there will be some practical stuff, not so much tonight, but we will look at a few practical demos next week and the week after. For anyone who's familiar with this area or who plays around with technology, you probably recognize that screenshot. It's from a shell window from Kali Linux. Kali is a favorite of both attackers and defenders, security professionals. It's a version of the operating system Linux, which has a whole bunch of pre-installed security tools for testing and also for attacking or simulating attacks in the spirit of testing, of course. So we'll be looking at a few things that will involve using a Kali instance, and we'll get to the demos next week. Hopefully they're interesting and they'll help sort of illustrate some of the theory. It's all very well to show you a bunch of slides, but it's more, I think, effective and interesting and a bit fun if you can actually see how these things work in practice. Okay, so the obligatory warning. What we're going to be doing does illustrate techniques which, if misused, could be construed as computer crime. If you're doing the kinds of things that we're talking about as a researcher or as a student wanting to learn those things, you really, really need to make sure you are only ever operating on systems you own or that you have explicit permission to act on. Most jurisdictions have fairly stringent laws globally about people accessing systems they're not authorized to access or disrupting operations of systems they don't own. So you don't want to be innocently trying out some of the things you learn either here or in other forums or watching YouTube on live systems on the internet, only to have the police or the federal police come knocking on your door and say, hey, your IP address has been attacking, a government website or something like that. So just something we need to sort of clear up right from the get-go. All of the stuff I'll be showing you will be using systems that I've built and I own. And of course, if you want to go and learn more and do stuff on your own, feel free on systems you also own or build or have paid for specifically for the purposes of security tools testing, penetration testing, etc. So yes, please don't do stuff on other people's systems. You're probably going to end up breaking the law, and we don't want that. All right, so we have to get that out the way because it's that kind of subject. There is offensive techniques we're going to be discussing, must always occur within a realm that you control. Right, so we've got a couple of topics. First one, we're just going to run through some security fundamentals. This is really just terminology, a few of the principles and the basics that underpin really everything across the whole realm of cyber or information security. So some terms like asset, threat, vulnerability, risk, control, words that exist in the vernacular, of course, but in the context of cybersecurity, they actually have very specific definitions, which are really important because they're things that we talk about a lot. They underpin the work that we do from an analysis perspective, from a design, build, deliver, run systems perspective. And when you're communicating with other security folks, it's really important that you use the correct terminology so there's no confusion about what it is you're actually talking about. So first of all, starting really simply, what do we mean by security? So security, for the Oxford Dictionary definition, is simply the state of being free from danger or threat. So really, when it comes to information security or security of information systems, it's all about control. We want to have control over our property, control over our data, control over our thoughts, control over our speech. If we can do that in a safe way, then we feel secure. And it's the same concept as security outside of the information realm, but it definitely applies that way to the information realm as well. Having control is really important. And control really facilitates the prevention from harm. So the whole point of information or cybersecurity is to protect information from harm. So prevention of unwanted exposure. You don't want people seeing things who aren't authorized to see it. You don't want your personal information on the public internet. Prevention of loss. You don't want your data stolen. You don't want money stolen from your bank account. And prevention of unwanted change or physical damage. It's not just about hiding things, encrypting and keeping things secret from other folks. It's about saying, if I have a document which describes a product and has a dollar value, how do I make sure that at the end of the day and at the end of the transaction, that dollar value hasn't changed? You don't want to see transactions become corrupted. So that's also something that's under the purview of information security. And we'll talk a bit more about the pillars or principles that each of those aligns with shortly. But that's really just, it seems fundamental, but it's just clarifying really what we mean when we talk about security, control of information, such that we can absolutely decide who changes it, who sees it, and who makes it available or takes it away and deletes it. So one of the paradoxes in security, and this is probably something that is familiar to anyone who's ever worked in project management or project delivery, security, functionality, ease of use. It's a spectrum, as you see here, and you can really only ever have two of them. If you're a PM, any PMs in the room, you've probably come up against the time, quality, cost paradigm. You can be fast and cheap, but it's going to be rubbish. It can be high quality and fast, but it's going to be very expensive, or it can be cheap and fast, but it's going to be of a terrible quality. I might have just repeated one of those, but you know what I'm getting at. You can't have all three at once. And the same goes with information security. You can have extremely secure data, but the systems can be very hard to use. There was an old saying years ago, I looked for the quote before tonight, but I couldn't find it. A computer scientist from the 1960s once said, the only secure computer is one set into a block of concrete, disconnected from any information source and buried 50 feet under the ground. And even then, I'm not so sure that's secure. So yes, you can make information perfectly secure, but it's not accessible. It's not functional. You can't have information systems, and certainly not information systems connected to the internet, where the information can be perfectly secure. There's no such thing. So as a security professional, you always need to consider how secure is secure enough such that the information is also accessible to the right people at the right time, and the performance is good, etc., etc. So you've got to consider where in that spectrum a particular piece of information or information system needs to sit. You can never be fully secure, completely usable, and completely functional all at the same time. It's just simply not possible. It's a a constant compromise between those. I've always been a fan of the XKCD comics. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with those. Excuse me, I've pasted one of them there, which is a sort of tongue-in-cheek security tip from Randall Munroe, the author of XKCD from 1820. The link is there to his comics, and it's, I thought, quite funny. So it's one of those sort of lists you get of, hey, how to have a secure password, only use prime numbers, etc. So it's the kind of thing that you hear about people saying, be secure, only do this, only do that. And sometimes that advice can seem a little difficult to implement. Well, yes, security can be achieved, but at the cost of functionality and usability. So worth considering. Very difficult to have, not difficult, but you must balance those properties. You can't have all three, fortunately. So there's a bunch of fundamental security principles which really are the basis for everything that we'll talk about and for everything you do anywhere within the security profession. And the basis of that is known as the CIA triad. And every security subject and every security book in history will always have this as its basis. It's worth covering briefly. As I said on the slide, it's inevitable. So let's get it done early and get it out of the way. So the first of those properties is confidentiality. This is really what most people think of when we talk about security. I want to keep something secret, right? And yes, it's very important. Confidentiality is a very, very important security property, very important property of information. We want only authorized users to view information. And confidentiality, if effective, prevents unauthorized disclosure. But it's only one of the three really fundamental principles that we care about. The second one is integrity. And integrity is all about change control. I only want authorized people to be able to change my information. So we may have something like a password. That's absolutely something we want to keep confidential. We also may have something like a payment we make to a company for something, for a product that we buy. We may not care that that's secret, but we certainly don't want the price to change. So that is about integrity. So often they're complementary, although they apply to the same piece of data, the same information asset, but they can also be exclusive. Sometimes confidentiality is really important, whereas integrity is not. And other times integrity is really important and confidentiality is not. A good thing to think of there is something like an annual result for a company. Before the annual results are released, it's very sensitive information. Whereas the same information the day after the AGM, when the results are released, is now public. So these properties can change over time as well. They're not set in stone forever. But understanding the amount of confidentiality required, how important is confidentiality for any given information asset, or how important integrity is for any given information asset, really, really key to understanding what's the best way to protect that information from harm. The final one in the CIA triad is availability, and that's all about access to the information when you need it. So if availability is preserved, only authorized users can remove the information, and it prevents unauthorized removal if it's effective. It's probably the least, I won't say important, but the least common of the three. Confidentiality, probably the most common, something we talk about daily with information. Integrity is important, especially in finance, banking, payments, things like that. Availability is always important, certainly from a system perspective. We don't like it when our bank's down and we can't buy things. But in terms of the individual information assets, it's just something that sort of gets left to the end. But all three properties are really important. If we say that our information is secure, it has good confidentiality, good integrity protection, and good availability protection. So all three really need to be intact in order for us to say, yes, we're confident that the security of this information is good. There's actually more. It's not just those three. There are others. There's actually about 9 of these altogether. I won't cover all 9, but there's a couple that are pretty important. The concept of authenticity, authentication, and authorization. When we talked about C, I, and A, we said only authorized users can view, change, or delete. So what's an authorized user? It's somebody who we have validated their identity, and we can say, yes, you are Bob or you are Alice, and therefore you have permission to view the information or change the information. If we haven't authenticated the user, then we don't know if they're authorized because we don't know who they are. We haven't validated who they are. So control of information requires that we validate the identity of the subject accessing the information. Otherwise, we really can't determine whether or not they have the right to view, change, or delete. Another important property, especially from a legal perspective when it comes to information, is called non-repudiation. So repudiation is the ability to deny performing an action. Non-repudiation is the inability of an identified individual to deny an action. So if you identify the individual and they make a change to a document, we need to make sure we can say that, yes, we definitely know that user made a change to that information. That way, if they say, no, it wasn't me, well, your user account, your user identifier is positively bound to the change, to the information, and therefore they aren't able to deny it. So think about it in terms of legal contracts or anything like that, where we just don't want people to say, oh, it wasn't me, I didn't sign it, et cetera, et cetera. Think of it as a signature. If someone signs a document, it's likely that we can use that physical signature to have some level of assurance that they actually signed the document if it gets compared to other sample signatures, for example. Non-repudiation is what's being achieved there, and we need to be able to do that in a digital realm as well. Steve, you put up a question. I will address that straight away. Yes, it is. So availability in system terms. So if you think about infrastructure, and this is where I mentioned availability is something that from a pure information security point of view is sort of the poor third cousin of the triad. When we deal with information assurance in the real world, confidentiality, integrity, you talk about them all the time. Availability, generally availabilities of systems, that's not a pure security concern. That's something that is deferred to the sort of platform or infrastructure realm. Are the systems available? Are they up? Are they performant? Do we have redundancy? Do we have multiple availability zones in our cloud infrastructure? That's all really important, but from an information security point of view, it's really more about if that's all true, and that's the infrastructure availability component, is the data then available to us if the systems are available? And the systems might be available, but someone's been able to delete the data. So therefore, the availability of the information from a pure information security point of view is potentially now compromised. An unauthorized user was able to remove access to the data. The systems can be up, all of the servers can be running, and the website's there, but the data's gone. So it's a subtle difference, but I totally take your point. And it was something I grappled with in my early days of information security. I never really got the concept of availability. I'd come from an infrastructure background, and I thought, well, isn't that what I used to do as an infrastructure architect? Worry about redundancy, DR, clusters of servers with failover and load balancers, etc. And that is true. That is where most commercial availability time and money is spent. Purely information security perspective, we're talking about the data on the available system, whether or not it can be deleted or removed from view. So deleted is the word I've chosen there to make it simple. The final one, accountability. So binding actions to identified individuals. So that really relates to non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is not being able to deny an action. Accountability is positively identifying an action to a user. And that's really important in a lot of commercial environments. You want to make sure that if someone accesses data or if they change documents or if they access websites, we have a log of who did what and when, so that if there's any reason for a forensic trail to be followed, if something's happened, if some attack has occurred or if data has been leaked, we have an audit trail that we can use. So a very important part of certainly information system configuration design is to make sure that accountability is built in. There is adequate logging, logs are protected, and we know who did what when, and that stuff is robust and can't be easily deleted or removed. So there's always an audit trail to go back to. So I guess to summarize, information security discipline is concerned with preserving or establishing one or more of these fundamental attributes, generally at least several. You're never really just doing one. So if you're doing confidentiality, you've also got to authenticate and authorize. So they generally come together in some way, but those are the properties that we're really talking about. If we're saying information is secure, we have validated and assured that multiple of these properties are true at any given point in time. So types of control. So how do we stop confidentiality being compromised, integrity being compromised, we use security controls. And there's lots and lots of controls. There are systems, there are configurations, there are behaviors, there are processes, there are policies, all sorts of different controls. We won't go into a lot of detail around them. Other subjects treat that stuff at a great level of depth, but there really are three classes of control that I guess are important to understand at the most fundamental level. The first class is prevention. These are controls which stop the bad thing happening. So in the case of network traffic, if we don't want traffic to enter a part of the network or reach a certain host, we stop it with a firewall policy. That's a preventative control. If we don't want malware to run, execute in memory and infect a machine or compromise a machine, an endpoint, then we run anti-malware product, which will stop the malware from running, prevent it from running. In the case of physical security, we lock a door. We don't let people into the room in the first place. That's the preventative control. The most effective, the most desirable, not always possible. So we do have another couple of layers that we need to care about. The second layer is detective controls or detection. So in the case of network traffic, we know that the traffic may have got where we don't want it to get, but we can analyze logs. We can detect and see if maybe traffic on a certain port has access to a certain system at a certain time. So we didn't stop it, but we can check the logs and see if it's happened. In terms of what people do every day at work, we can monitor their activity. We can keep real-time activity logs. We can use behavioral monitoring of users to see what people are doing. And that might be something that we do more stringently if they do very sensitive tasks. For instance, in a bank, you have tellers, or you might have people who are approving or actioning interbank payments of many millions or billions of dollars. That's very sensitive stuff, and little mistakes or malicious actions can really cause some major damage. So those types of users may be very closely monitored, minute to minute, transaction to transaction. So that will not prevent them doing something bad, but if they do, then we're going to know about it fairly quickly, and we'll have an audit trail to go back and do something about it. Again, in a physical context, that might be equivalent to having CCTV, monitoring an area. You can still have someone walk in, you haven't prevented them entering, but you can respond. You can do something about it because you've detected that they've entered. And that segues us into the final one, which is responsive controls. And this is where we didn't prevent it, but we've detected it, and now we need to do something about it. So we had to come in and respond. In the case of network traffic, okay, it got there. We don't like that. That wasn't traffic that's desirable. That could indicate a bad thing has happened. So what can we do? We can isolate the system from the network. We might implement a firewall policy on the fly, or disconnect a switch, or simply unplug the machine and stop network traffic reaching the system. In the case of a system that's vulnerable to malware that might get infected, okay, it's got infected or it's had some vulnerability exploited, and we don't want it to happen again. So what do? Once we've cleaned the system, we make sure that we apply the software patches so the vulnerability that the malware exploited has been closed, has been gotten rid of. So that's a response to the detection of something bad happening on the endpoint. In the case of the physical world, we didn't lock the door. We've seen the intruder wander into the room, so we dispatch the security guards. We respond by getting someone in there to get rid of the physical threat, the wrong person in the wrong place. All right, so that's all well and good. That's about controls. There is another layer that's really important too that I want to cover, and that is all about the security principles. So when you think about problems in terms of securing information or analyzing systems that transact information, you sort of got to break it down to the most basic principles of what are the fundamental things we must do in and of our designs. Not just about encrypting data to keep it confidential, but how do we think about our system architectures, our environments, our entire computing networks to make sure that these are going to be robust and are going to be best equipped to protect us from information compromise. And there's a whole bunch of these. I like these 6. I'm just going to run through 6 of them, which I think are really important. The first one, which should be relatively familiar, and it's not new, it's something that's been around since forever, since the Middle Ages or before, is defense in depth. So in the cybersecurity context, defense in depth is all about if you have a single control fail, if you have an information asset and it has a control protecting it from harm, and that control fails, the asset isn't compromised. There are multiple layers of control. So you might have a firewall protecting a system from traffic we don't want, but you also have anti-malware running on the system. So in case it gets through, there's another layer. If the firewall fails, the anti-malware product will hopefully defend it. And so you can have 2 layers, you can have 4 layers, 10 layers, defense in depth, multiple layers such that if one fails, the whole system doesn't come crashing down. We have another principle called need to know. So this is more about access. People have to access systems. Systems access other systems, like a website accesses a database to retrieve banking transactions or whatever it's doing. And need to know is the principle that says only an asset, the access to an asset must only be granted if there is a justification. So back in the early days, anyone who's been in technology for long enough and has been a sysadmin in a former life, or maybe they still are, there's the whole concept of, God rights or access to entire system networks. And I've been there. My first couple of jobs in IT were sysadmin roles, and you pretty much had access to everything all the time. And that's a really dangerous place to be. If someone got my password, I have access to stuff I have no business having access to. I don't need to know. And so suddenly this information becomes exposed because my single account can be used to compromise information which may be very, very sensitive. So access provisioning, when we allocate rights to people or systems who are consuming information, we've got to make sure they have a need to know that information. If they don't, then they shouldn't have access. Pretty simple stuff, but it's a very important principle when it comes to things like designing access models for groups of users. You have finance, you have legal, you have admin, you have the sysadmins. They're all going to have their own resources, which they need to know, but maybe no one else does. So let's not give people access to things they don't need. The concept is called containing the blast radius. If something goes wrong, someone has their account compromised or hacked, then they only are going to lose or have damage done to the information they see and to nothing else. So it's a way of containing damage in the event of a breach. Least privilege, pretty closely related. So once you've decided what information people can access and only that information is given, they are given access to, what are the privileges they need to access that? They might not need to write or update, only to read. So if someone only needs to read an asset, only needs to read a document, for instance, then only grant read access. Don't grant write access, because then if someone compromises their account, or if they've got a document open and they make a mistake and change it, suddenly the integrity of the document is compromised. Why? Because they didn't have the least privilege. They had a privilege they didn't need or shouldn't have had, which was, in this case, write access. So least privilege, really important again when designing access to information. Only grant the level of access that is actually required and absolutely nothing more. Separation of duties. This is something that transcends information security. It's really important. Certainly, again, banking is a good example where you have high value payments. For instance, a payment system between banks might have a threshold of, say, $1 billion. At $1 billion, that transaction cannot be approved by a single person. It has to be created by person A, and person B has to approve it. That's often known as the 4 eyes process. And the reason for that is that we don't want to encourage collusion. We don't want a single person to have the ability to cause a massive amount of harm. Both people would have to collude or be compromised. 2 accounts would need to be compromised. 2's passwords would need to be guessed before that transaction could occur to that level of that dollar value, and therefore that level of damage. So separation of duties, having one person create transactions, one person approve transactions, or maybe more than 2 people, is a really good way of, again, spreading the responsibilities across multiple people. It's more difficult. It raises the bar. It's more difficult to for an attacker, a bad guy, to cause harm if they have to compromise more than one person, whether they influence them, coerce them, or whether they steal their account credentials or guess their passwords. So splitting the tasks helps mitigate both fraud and human error as well. You don't want people making mistakes if the dollar values are up in the billions of dollars. That's a really bad thing. Simplicity. There's an old saying that complexity is the enemy of security. Complex systems, technology systems are complex. That's just the way they get. But the principle should be, if you're designing a system, make it as simple as possible. The more parameters you have, the more configuration options you have, the more likely someone's going to make a mistake and not detect that mistake because there's so many options. So simplicity, really, really important. The simpler the system, the less likely it is to be misconfigured, and hopefully the more likely it is to stay secure and the information remains at the appropriate level of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the final one I like is secure default. So that's saying that before we use a system, it should be default. And if it fails, if something goes wrong, it should stay secure. It shouldn't become insecure in the event of failure. So if you're building a system and adding it to your corporate network and letting it access data, you build the operating system, but then you add all the patches, you add the monitoring software, you add the anti-malware, endpoint protection software. All of that occurs before the system is allowed to do its job. You don't allow systems that are not fully secured to start transacting and start interacting with data. So that's a really important principle as well. If you're building systems, don't add them to the production network, to the live data network, until such time as they have all of the security baseline policies in place. So again, these are not specific to any given transaction or any given data set. They're more about thinking of a large environment of systems and information systems as a whole, and what are the principles that should underpin any design decisions or any delivery or change decisions that occur within that environment. So fundamentals, as I said, they're not new. The idea of defense in depth, for instance, this is something that goes back to medieval times. You have castles with moats, you have inner courtyards, outer courtyards, walls, battlements, etc. These are all layers of defense. If someone gets across the moat, they have to get through the gate. If they get through the gate, they're in the courtyard. They've got to get to the inner courtyard. You have multiple places at which they can be defended against. But unfortunately, if they're not applied correctly, as per the second picture, you can have a nice secure gate, but if there's no wall around it, it ain't going to do you much good. So just an example where these principles are not new. They apply to the world outside of cybersecurity. They've applied to physical security realm for many years, but they are universal and they are really important to understand. A little bit of terminology before we finish up this section. A couple of words that get thrown around a fair bit. You'll hear me use terms like threat, asset, vulnerability, risk. Each of those very, very specific definitions, which are important to understand. They're all related. Asset, most of us think of an asset as something of value, like a car or a computer or a piece of jewelry, and that is true. That's a tangible asset. But in cybersecurity or information security, we are very concerned with information assets. So information has value, and information assets is really what this entire discipline is all about protecting. So an intangible information asset is the core asset that cybersecurity is all about protecting and controlling access to. A threat is an action or an event. So it is something that occurs that may cause harm. It may not, but it may cause harm to an asset. Contrast to a threat is a vulnerability, and a vulnerability is a condition or a circumstance, something that exists, which is static. It's not happening. It's something that is static, a property of a thing that exposes an asset to potential harm. And a risk is sort of at the intersection of all of that. A risk, of course, in day-to-day terminology is just something bad will happen. In cybersecurity, a risk is both the likelihood, so the probability, and the impact, so the damage done if a threat harms an asset by exploiting a vulnerability. So the risk is the outcome of the threat exploiting the asset via the vulnerability. That's sort of how all the terms hang together. All right, so quick quiz. Simon has a short guessable password, making it easy for an attacker to impersonate Simon and log into his account. What is the weak password an example of? Is it a risk? Is it a threat? Is it an asset? Or is it a vulnerability? Happy for anyone to, I haven't got the chat window open, but feel free to throw some answers in chat. Vulnerability, 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 vulnerability. Fantastic. Yep, you're all paying attention. Just a little question to make sure everyone's awake, but that's good. Yes, you're spot on. If a vulnerability is an existing condition that enables an attacker to log into Simon's account, silly Simon with his weak password, which is the threat, the logging into someone else's account and impersonating them, that's the threat. They will then compromise the information protected by that account, which is the harm, and the information, of course, in this case is the asset. The likelihood and the damage that can be done by someone impersonating me, Simon, no, not me, the other Simon, the one with a weak password, and accessing their information. That's the risk. So yeah, it all relates together, but they are distinct terms. Very important to use them in the correct context so that, so A, people know what you're talking about, know that you know what you're talking about, and also so that you can clearly communicate what it is you're talking about to others. Just like that, exactly. Simple Simon and Silly Simon. Yes, both. And I have been both at various times, I can confidently tell you. All right, so a couple more things to cover before we get into the meat, the recon stuff. What exactly is hacking? And I'm sure if anyone's seen Princess Bride, they will get the meme there. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So hacking gets used as an insult. Oh, the hackers, they hacked this, they hacked that. And it's a very common word in our lingo today. And in fact, it's in the name of the subject, hacking countermeasures. Um, Hacking is a concept that emerged in the 50s at MIT. The Tech Model Railroad Club used to play around with the lighting and the power circuitry of the model railroads such that they could make the trains go faster or do different things. And that was referred to as hacking the railway. And it was really just pushing the system to a place where maybe it wasn't meant to go, or you were coloring outside the lines. It was beyond the documented specifications. And that's really the essence of hacking. It's all about the love of experimentation, often in a mischievous way. It was, don't get caught air. Definitely an MIT tradition. You can see there's some pictures. One on the top right was, getting into the lighting system of a building and putting a smiley face by lighting up the rooms. A famous one that occurred was the on-campus fire department truck, or one of their trucks was disassembled by students and then reassembled on the roof of one of the auditoriums. So yeah, none of this relates to computers. It's just simply people doing mischievous things that maybe no one thought of doing, but they're sort of fun and quirky and have an unexpected result. And that's really where the idea of hacking came from. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, because it's a convenient word, modern media has really co-opted the term and uses it as a pejorative. So generally, it describes unethical or illegal behavior, really a substitution for the concept of cybercrime. I'm not going to dwell on this. I just thought I'd bring it up. It's a nice little bit of history, and it's something that's always sort of gotten under my skin, the term hacking. Everyone uses it, and it's okay to use it. But yeah, it's not just about being criminals. People can be hackers because they like to do interesting stuff, and they read the rule book, throw it away, and do something creative with whatever it is, model trains or some other type of equipment. So, and there's a link there at the bottom if anyone wants to go and read about the 60th birthday of the word hacking from an MIT publication. Ethical hacking, which is what we sort of are getting at here. It's about applying that experimentation and that creative thought to computer systems, but in a way that benefits the users of the system. It doesn't exploit the users of the system. So exploring systems in the manner of an attacker. Having a goal to better understand what's going on. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? What happens if I do these two things together? And is that a bad thing or a good thing? And does it cause the system to explode, to crash, to somehow spew out information that I shouldn't have access to? But ethical hacking is really doing that with explicit permissions and with a scope, as in these are the boundaries of what you can do. Do it within those boundaries. And if you find something, let us know so we can fix it so people don't get their information compromised. So it's about doing what hackers do, what criminals do, but doing it in an ethical way, doing it in a way that is allowed, prescribed, expected, such that the net result is a safer, more secure system at the end of the exercise. Generally, and in popular literature, you'll hear that referred to in terms of hats. A black hat hacker or a black hat is generally a cyber criminal. The Anonymous Collective is a good example of that. You might agree with their methods, but they do things that are prohibited by law. So technically, they are black hats. A white hat, alternatively, is an ethical hacker, a security researcher. There's lots of groups globally. Team Kimru was one that I chose as a logo to put up. They're a Welsh collective of security researchers do a whole bunch of really good stuff. They find bugs, they find vulnerabilities, they advise the vendors of those products that they have vulnerabilities. They provide security consulting to companies, making sure they keep their environments safe. So they're the good guys, I guess. They're the white hats. Somewhere in between all of that is the grey hats. So you've got people who aren't breaking the law, but might be doing stuff that is questionable. And the example I've chosen there is a company called NSO Group. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They're one of a number of companies which ostensibly are security research. They understand how products work. In the case of NSO Group, they are very good with mobile operating systems. And NSO produce a couple of products which are all about compromising mobile operating systems to spy on the mobile user. And they sell those products to some pretty sketchy places, some authoritarian regimes and governments. And, from a technical perspective, they're doing something interesting. They are hacking a device and pushing it past its limits. But from an ethical point of view, maybe they should think about who they sell their stuff to. I mean, maybe that aligns with your own philosophy, but for much of the world, they would say, well, if, journalists are getting murdered because they've had their communications snooped on by a government that's authoritarian, because the government bought a product from NSO Group, yeah, you can sort of see why that might tag them as a grey hat group. So they're not alone. There are many, many groups that do this. And that's sort of really the spectrum, I guess, of people who would be considered hackers, if that's the term you want to use. The process of hacking, I'll keep using the word, even though I still have trouble using it, but it's the name of the subject, so I'll keep using it. It follows a logical progression of phases. If someone wants to attack you, they're going to perform a series of things that follow a reasonably logical order. They're not hard and fast rules, but it is a fairly good template for the steps that are taken in order to attack, both by real attackers and also by testers or researchers who are trying to probe the defenses of a system they've been asked to test. It starts off with reconnaissance, and that's all about finding out, what the area looks like in a fairly benign way. I mean, if we look at a real world parallel, a burglar might drive up a street and just check out the houses, what cars are parked in the driveways. No one's going to notice them. They're just driving up the street, but they're doing reconnaissance. They're seeing what's going on. They're getting as much information about potential targets as they can. The next step, once reconnaissance has been performed and they've checked and found a target, that would be the scanning and enumeration phase. So that's going one step deeper and saying, all right, I think I know who my target is. What do I need to do to compromise them? So from again, the burglary analogy, they would be checking the manufacturers of locks or what alarm system they have and where are the alarm, where are the cameras and do they phone home or are they just a siren that's localized? So getting more information, but walking around the house and checking that stuff out, that's potentially going to expose them to compromise, expose them to detection. So it's a bit riskier, but we're getting deeper. We're getting deeper into the stack and we're getting closer to understanding our target such that we can perform whatever it is we want to perform. Gaining entry, so that in the analogy we've had so far is breaking the lock, jumping the fence, smashing the window, disabling the alarm system, and getting in the door. Or dropping a pot plant on the dog if you're a fan of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And that's really where the action happens. That's the bit that gets them into the target environment, whether they're breaking into a house or breaking into a system. Maintaining access, that's maybe leaving a window open, stealing a key so that they can come back later at their leisure. Lots of ways that could happen in the physical world, in the information security world, that also occurs, and we'll cover these in a bit more detail in a few minutes. Part of that process in the cybersecurity world is what's called escalation of privilege. So once attackers get into a system, they generally then want to get additional privileges. They might compromise a system by guessing the password or stealing the password of a regular user, but they're not an admin. Someone's applied, need to know, least privilege, defense in depth. They have only got access to a small data set, but they will set about trying to get more privileges whilst they're in the system. And that could take a little time, and sometimes those middle phases might iterate over and over and over so that the attackers can get in the door first up, but then continue to expand and escalate privilege and get more access so that they can achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. A bit like breaking the front door, but then finding the safe and then cracking the safe. So getting in the door was great, but cracking the safe, that's where the real prize is. The stages can be iterative. Covering tracks, I didn't really talk about that. That's, wiping off fingerprints, footprints, deleting stored video in the physical example. In the case of the digital example, it might be deleting event logs or whatever to make sure that no one knows that they were compromised. Um, so yeah, this is the process that is used by both legitimate researchers, penetration testers, and also nefarious attackers as well. As I mentioned, some of those stages will iterate. Once access is gained, if a attacker gets through the door of gets into a network, they might go, okay, I'm into a network, I'm onto a system, but what other systems are in here? So they start scanning again. They might find other systems on the network. They move to a different part of the network, jump onto that system, and then they'll scan again. So that might iterate several times for them to find out more about what happens. The target breach, a target in the US was breached back in 2013. I'll touch on that in a few slides' time. That was a case where the attackers started off in a contractor, an electrical contractor or a cooling contractor that was providing services to target. They got into the target network through the sort of the billing portal, the service portal. They then jumped from there to the target stores, and they were able to sniff out things like the electronic scales and other systems. And eventually they got all the way across to the POS terminals, which allowed them to install malware on the POS terminals and skim the credit card numbers, which was a big part of the attack. So it was an iterative process of getting in the front door, scanning, moving somewhere else, scanning, moving somewhere else. One of the problems was Target had a very poorly designed network, and so the attackers really just moved around with impunity. A well-designed segmented network, which we'll talk about in the network session in a couple of weeks, would have helped mitigate that or at least slow them down so that they could have been detected and evicted a bit earlier. So, all right, so just running through those briefly, each one of those. So reconnaissance, again, surveying the target, simple, misunderstood, often undervalued. There is a quote, I believe it's attributed apocryphally. Someone said it was George Washington, and I don't believe that's true, which was something along the lines of, if I had 3 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 2.5 sharpening my axe. And it's a nice summary of what we're talking about here. The professionals, what differentiates professional attackers from the amateurs is the professionals take time. They really scope out their targets. They want to get in, get out quickly with no detection and not get caught. So they spend a lot of time on reconnaissance. It's a early but important and, as I said, undervalued phase of the attack process. There's really two types of reconnaissance. There's the passive reconnaissance, like the driving down the street, totally unobtrusive. That can be done by Google searches, by using LinkedIn or job sites or any other sites or resources on the internet that receive millions of accesses per day. There's no feasible way of telling if any of those accesses are there to do research to stage an attack. They could just be people casually browsing the resources. So that's a passive reconnaissance exercise. Nothing changes. Detection risk is low, if not nil. Yeah, it will reveal some information, not super rich information, but it will give you some information about the target. Active reconnaissance, that is a little bit more invasive. There is some impact, potentially leaves a trail that can be tracked. So that might be pulling up out the front of someone's house and having a good gander at it. The neighbors might notice you, but then you drive off, they might get your rego. So, there's a chance of detection, but it also could be just seen as something innocent as well, depending on how paranoid the observers are. But reconnaissance, the earliest stage, really, really important to investigate and see what's going on. We'll talk a bit more about reconnaissance towards the end of the session. Scanning and enumeration, as I said before, that's where you go the level deeper. You stop, you check the locks, you see if there's a dog, you look at the brands of the cameras and decide, are they robust? Are they signaling back to a central point, or are they just localized? It's often confused with or blended with reconnaissance. They may occur very rapidly after each other, or they may be two very distinct phases of the attack process. It really just takes what you find in reconnaissance and then goes that little bit deeper. In a digital realm, reconnaissance might discover the web URLs of a company. It might find the IP address ranges of the company's infrastructure. But then the scanning phase will start to actually scan those IP address ranges, scan the web servers that it finds. So those systems will start logging the fact that somebody is sending data to them. Now, it may not be construed as an attack, but it could be if it's incredibly invasive and lots of packets are sent in a very short period of time. We'll look at scanning next week, and I'll run through some tools that we can use to do that, and we'll see that they can be very, very invasive, and it can be very obvious that scanning is occurring. So they're really touching systems, probing their defenses, and getting some real information out of them. Reconnaissance is great, but if you're an attacker in a digital sense, is it a Windows server or a Unix server? Is it a Cisco router or a Juniper router? Who knows? And their approach from an attack perspective for the gaining entry part of the process will be very different depending on what operating system it's running, what version of the operating system, what patches are installed, etc., etc. That's what scanning and enumeration is all about, is determining that information. Lots of tools available. In terms of network scanning, there's really only one that anyone uses, and that's called Nmap. It has variants, and there are, of course, others, but Nmap's a real Swiss Army knife of network scanning. We'll have a play with that next week, and I'll do a quick demo and show you how Nmap works. But it's free, it's open, it's on Kali by default, and you can install it on just about anything also for free. Gaining access, that's the next phase. That's where the fun begins. That's what most people think of when they talk about hacking. But really, as you can see, that's the third part of a process, which is now potentially days or weeks or even months old. A serious attack campaign could spend months in recon and scanning before the attack is mounted, because the attackers, if they're professionals, want to know exactly what their target environment is. How do I get an exploit that breaks into this system first time and does it in the most quiet and innocuous way possible? It's whether you get a foothold into the target network or the target system. And the attack approach will depend on what the reconnaissance and scanning has revealed. If the target has weak wireless security, maybe attack the access point, try and join the access point, or tell the other clients on the site to join your access point, something known as the evil twin attack. Vulnerable web application, write an exploit, use an exploit against the web server, a cross-site scripting or a cross-site request forgery attack. We don't really go into web stuff in the short course. We definitely cover it in the long course. So that's something that we cover in ITE516. Or from a human perspective, maybe the help desk isn't very good at their job. Maybe they don't validate identity. You've leaned on the counter next to the help desk and heard them do a password reset for a user, and they've found out they didn't really ask them any questions. So maybe the easiest way in the door is simply getting someone's username and then calling the help desk innocently and saying, "Oh, I've forgotten my password. Can you please reset it for me?" Whatever works. So the attackers will work out the best way of gaining access based on what their recon and scanning phases reveal to them. Lots of tools. It's going to depend on the approach. Metasploit is a framework that was developed by a company called Rapid7 about 2 decades ago. It democratized really advanced exploitation. Before Metasploit, if you wanted to write custom exploits, they often required knowledge of assembly language and all sorts of other really high-level skills, which most attackers wouldn't have and needed to either buy or borrow or steal from others. Metasploit, it's a double-edged sword. It's one of those dual-use technologies that we talk about. It's great for researchers and students to learn about this sort of stuff, and we'll look at Metasploit next week and how it works. But it also then brings attack tools right there to your desktop for free from the internet for anyone to use. So again, hence the warning at the start, you can get this stuff, use it in your own environment, and do not use it against public resources, lest you have the federal police knocking on your door. So yeah, once upon a time, that gaining access phase was really, really hard. Unfortunately, if we enable people to learn and research about things like gaining access, we also then provide them the tools to do it for real if they're of a mind. And what stops them, I guess, is that ethical boundary. Are you a black hat or are you a white hat? Hopefully, everyone in this room is a white hat. So it lowers the bar to entry for exploitation. And definitely not the only way to do it. People still write custom exploits. There's still a million ways to break into systems. And it's not just about technology. As I said, it may be social engineering, getting a help desk to reset a password for an account that's not yours. Stealing an access pass and walking into a building. Another gaining access technique which has nothing to do with a computer screen. Maintaining access, once the attackers are in, they really want to stay there. So at this point, the attack might stop. There is a type of threat actor known as an APT, an advanced persistent threat. That's where the attackers will get into the system and they'll lay low. They want to stay in there. They want to learn about the network. They want to gradually siphon data off or make changes that no one notices. So they may go quiet and listen after this stage. But in order to retain access and to maybe guarantee themselves access in future, they could co-opt systems and infect them with Trojans or with bots so that they can do things on their behalf. They might set up control channels, command and control channels, such that systems in the network can talk outbound to attackers' systems somewhere on the internet. They do that quietly and then leave. Or install things like backdoors or rootkits so that the systems will act in an unpredictable way, maybe not detectable by the users of those systems. They could leave behind artifacts. They could create user accounts, add themselves to privileged groups. Lots of different techniques have been used over the years by different attack groups. And all of those things generally leave some evidence that an astute defender, maybe a network analyst or a security analyst working in an operations center, might be able to detect that, oh, there's new files have appeared on this system which weren't there yesterday. Oh, well, let's check an online resource. Those files are known to be used by a certain a threat actor, an attack crew, and they might mean that they've been in and left them. So if they've been in, we should check privileged groups, their new administrators in the administrators group, etc., etc. So these are all techniques used by attackers to maintain access to systems they've got into, but they also provide things, artifacts that can be used by defenders to determine if or not systems have been accessed and then to respond so that the prevention has failed, but they can be used to detect, and then the defenders can choose how to respond to that. Final step is covering tracks. So standard criminal practice. It's about foiling detection, remaining unseen. You know, an example would be to don't use a Ferrari as a getaway car. If you want to escape the scene, do it in an SUV. There's a billion of them on the road. Don't drive like a maniac. Once you've left the scene, anyone's going to see you and go, it's just another SUV. You're invisible. In terms of the digital realm, it's going to be using evasion techniques, stealth techniques. Potentially deleting logs, deleting evidence that someone logged into the system at a certain time from a certain place or using a certain account. Compromising system logs is actually one of the most common techniques used. And I've got a question in the bottom there, which I've just answered. One possible way to defeat this would be, well, actually, I didn't answer that question. Who could say if deleting logs is a threat here? So deleting logs would hide the tracks of the attacker. People are already answering it. One way right, exactly. Write only logs. Put logs somewhere else. All systems generally log locally, but a good secure system will take those logs and put them somewhere else. So even a sysadministrator, even if the attacker is acting as a sysadmin on that system, they can't reach the stored logs. So it's impossible, or nothing's ever impossible, very, very difficult for them to delete the evidence that something's gone wrong. So yeah, there are defenses which can be brought to bear here as well, but most attackers will hide, stay low and stealthy, and try to delete anything. If they're not deliberately leaving something to give them future access, they'll try to make sure they leave as few fingerprints as possible on the system. All right, I'm going to stop there for a minute, grab a breath. We've got a couple of slides to go specifically on reconnaissance. Shane, did you have anything you wanted to add at this point? Do you want to take any questions?
Just
or
a couple of questions, and I would encourage people who want to add more to get onto it, because we will stop around about 8:30 as usual.
Yep.
Simon, in the case of the hacker, would leave a backdoor open in the way of ports or a malware injection that leaves something open?
Potentially, yes. That would be one potential approach. So quite often malware might be a Trojan, and a Trojan is generally a function hiding inside another executable. And whilst you run the executable that you think you're running, it runs another executable in the background you don't see, which then makes a port listen. So that's absolutely an example of backdoor. Malware can do it. Lots of malware strains will do it. Or an attacker might do it without sending you malware via email. They might do it when they're on the system. So absolutely the same technique and the same result, leaving a backdoor open for future access. So.
And I think Steve's asked a question that you sort of semi-answered before. When a cyber criminal has hacked a system and elevated themselves to the highest level of privilege, can you ever really be sure that they've been removed from the system, even if the system has been rebuilt from a backup?
Yeah, excellent question. So I guess One approach is if you think you've been attacked, scorched earth approach is often a good one. For instance, if I was infected by malware, which I haven't been, touch wood, for a very long time, I wouldn't bother removing the malware. I'd delete everything and I would rebuild my operating system from scratch. So definitely rebuilding is a great way to try and remove all potential artifacts. And that's okay on my system. If it was a network system, a network with lots of systems and backups, yes, that's a good starting point. But to your point, I think the point you're making is what if the attackers have compromised the backups? And ransomware as a strain of malware is a really good example of that threat model. A lot of companies for many years have done online backups because it wasn't about leaving the backups secret somewhere. It was just about having another copy. So if the main copy died, we have another one. What ransomware does is encrypts the main copy so that you can't access it. And if it can reach the online copy, it'll encrypt that as well. So if your backups are not adequately protected, then how do you know that they are indeed, a untainted source of information? So in essence, it's the right approach, but there's absolutely another level to be considered there. How do you make sure your backups are of a high integrity as well? And I think that's not a trivial problem, but certainly, that is the right answer at the surface level. But the deeper question becomes, how do you make sure backups retain integrity too?
And one more quick question. Has the time in system / days compromised decreased?
As in recent times, like you're talking dwell time when attackers get into systems and remain undetected. I don't have really clear data at top of mind. I'd have to go back and look at some research. Some really good reference material there would be things like the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, the DBIR. That's released every year. It's an excellent roundup of the year just gone in terms of data breaches. Verizon respond to 50, 60, 70,000 breaches a year. They write excellent reports, very funny too in some ways, on that stuff. And they talk about things like dwell time, how long attackers are in systems, how long before they're detected and evicted. It can be incredibly long. Like I think the mean times can be up to 30, 40, 50 days that they've discovered that advanced attackers can hide in systems. Not sure that's increased or decreased over, say, the past 10 years. My guess would be it hasn't materially changed. One would hope, I guess, that we're shortening it because obviously a lot of money and energy is being burnt on improved defenses. But then just when the defenders can say use, large language models and AI to improve defenses, so can the attackers to improve attacking techniques. So as usual, it's a cat and mouse game of who can outsmart the other one. But yeah, I don't know definitively whether that has changed much, but I do know it can be a very long time, measured in months, where advanced attackers have been evicted from systems 50 plus days after they have been they've first penetrated. So.
Like Russian sleeper agents.
Yes, exactly. Just started watching Slow Horses, actually. If you're not watching that, I recommend it. I know I'm late to the party. Everyone's been telling me for years I need to watch it, and I can't believe I waited so long. All right, let me fly through the last remaining slides, and then I'll get back to those last questions. So reconnaissance, it's not just about attacking. It's about if you can't measure it, if you haven't measured it, you can't manage it. You need to know what's in your environment before the bad guys do, preferably. So reconnaissance, also known as footprinting, you got to expect your attackers know stuff. They're intelligent, they're patient, they're well-resourced, they're well-informed. And you need to think like the attacker. What will an attacker look for in my environment? What is it about me that is attractive to an attacker? It's a really important thing to understand. Researching your own environment is one way to do that. Those phases of reconnaissance, scanning, etc., that's something that defenders should do on a regular basis. You don't leave it until you get attacked to work out where your holes are. Figure out where your holes are proactively ahead of time. So yeah, success in battle depends on information. As Sun Tzu famously said, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. I think that's potentially a little optimistic, but important philosophy. Understand the battlefield. What is it about you that is vulnerable? What is it about you that attackers will go after? And reconnaissance can be a fairly simple thing. For instance, one of the most effective tools for recon is Google. This is an example of a company in Melbourne somewhere out in Mount Waverley. I just chose it randomly years ago as an example. Google Street View gives you a view of a building, and you can't really see from that. But I don't even need to leave my seat in my office to have a good look at that building. What does the front entrance look like? Are there security cameras? Where are the access ways? So very effective reconnaissance tool. I don't even need to drive down the street, let alone get out of my car. I can simply do some Google Street View type recon. So very effective tool, Google, not to be underestimated as something that can be used to start scoping out potential targets. And from a defensive perspective, what will someone find out about me and my company if they use Google? Another tool that's really useful is a tool called Netcraft. That's an old screenshot. It doesn't look like that today. It looks like this today. I can look at, say, itmasters.edu.au. So I'm looking at a website or a domain name. And what this does is it trawls through the database that Netcraft has of all the publicly visible properties, and it can give me a whole bunch of information where it's hosted. In this case, it's hosted behind a CDN called Cloudflare. If we roll down a bit further, we can see all the different technologies that are in use. The technology, it's a WordPress self-hosted site. So the attacker might go, oh, WordPress. WordPress has lots of vulnerabilities. If I wanted to attack IT Masters, not that you will, I would look for WordPress vulnerabilities, and so on and so forth. So this sort of information is freely available on the internet using tools like Google and Netcraft, and there's hundreds of others. And really, yes, I've accessed this site. My IP is now logged as having accessed this site, but so have a million other people today. There's really nothing feasible that anybody looking at Netcraft or Google would be able to tell to identify me as a potential attacker. I'm just another person browsing the web like everyone does every day of the week. Google has a bunch of other techniques as well. This is something that is sort of a staple of recon discussions. They're called Google Dorks or Advanced Google Techniques. There is a site called ExploitDB, which has the Google Hacking Database, and that has a whole bunch of different Google search terms which can be used to uncover potentially sensitive information. Bottom line, if it's on the internet and it's public facing, Google can probably see it, has probably indexed it, and is stored in the Google database. So if I was to take this here, I go the query here, I hope it's not too small to see, site:/github.com, and the string is begin OpenSSH private key. So I'm going to click on that, and that will do a Google search. Actually, no, it won't. It'll bring up the text that I can copy. And I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to throw that into Google. And that is going to search the site GitHub for that string. Now, this is a technique that used to be super effective. GitHub, as a software development repository, has upped its game in terms of security. It makes it a lot more difficult for you to commit sensitive information to your public GitHub repository. It's not impossible, it's just harder. GitHub has helped its users be more secure. But if we jumped on this first one, somebody here, and they may have just posted this deliberately, but it could be, it's an SSH private key. This is a private key to enable a connection securely to a shell of a remote machine. And inside of this blob of data is an encoded version of the private key. So what that Google search has done is not just search random terms from a website, it's searching for specific file types on a specific website. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these searches that you can do. They're getting harder to do effectively. Some of these are still quite recent. People are still posting them, well, at least up till 2024. But yeah, it's an underestimated way of finding out information about organizations and potentially uncovering sensitive things like SSH keys or private keys to TLS certificates. So yeah, that's a couple of examples there. Those three, unfortunately, don't work very well. This was one on the right here that once upon a time, people created database connections with a file which was known as dbcon, and quite often they contain passwords. So you could find dbcon files. The web developer didn't think they'd be public. No one would be browsing for this, but Google saw it. Google indexed it, and if you throw the right search term at Google, it will give you access to files potentially containing database access passwords. Again, over time, these techniques are getting less and less effective because people are becoming more secure, and sites like GitHub and others where people store stuff, are getting proactive in encouraging their users not to do silly things like put passwords in text files that are publicly available for Google to see. But a lot of information is simply a Google search away. Another good one that people don't realize is be careful what you share on social media. This is the kind of stuff that people don't realize is effective. Many penetration testers who do tests on physical security will look at their targets, they'll look at their social media feed and go, oh, they like dogs. So they start a conversation in the pub with them about dogs and they have a great conversation. They get a little drunk, they get a bit of information, loose lips of information flows out, and before you know it, the attacker or the tester has information that allows them to infiltrate their site or maybe impersonate someone at their site. So too much information being exposed can be a bad thing. A long time ago, I don't see these anymore. I don't use social media that much, but you would have all these quirky things. Oh, what's the first car that you drove stick shift in? Or do you remember your first grade teacher's name? Ha ha, it seems innocent and innocuous, but then if anyone's ever filled out a password recovery questionnaire as part of a login, these are the sorts of questions that you get asked. What was your favorite teacher's name? What was your first car? What's the name of the street you grew up in? So maybe, letting some random Facebook feed know, from your account's perspective, what your first car favorite teacher's name was. Are they harvesting that and then potentially using that to access other accounts that you've got secret questions in? So again, understand what it is that you're exposing to the world. Think about, if someone was just looking at these seemingly innocuous pieces of information, what could they do with that? That's sort of the key to counteracting reconnaissance as best you can. If you're online, companies are online, they need to do business. You can't hide everything, but you need to know what you're exposing. Final slide, the Target breach, as I mentioned before, in 2013, massive breach, 70 million credit card numbers walked out the door, lots of data was exfiltrated to Russia. It was a very comprehensive attack. Target's defenses weren't fantastic, but it all started with this PDF. Target and Microsoft worked together to rebuild Target's network. And it's a great white paper, success story. Target just revamped their entire network. And within that report, Microsoft Systems Center Manager 2007, we've got 5,400 POS terminals with System Center Operations Manager installed, i.e. they run Windows. How many sites with no IT personnel on site? There's lots of information inside this PDF, which on the surface just sounds like, oh, Microsoft and Target have worked together to do cool stuff. The attackers went, oh, really? And they used all of this information to craft an attack campaign, which was incredibly effective. Lots of literature on the Target breach online. There's a link to a US Senate report on that attack. But yeah, this is an example of, does that information you're exposing expose you potentially to future attacks? Can someone correlate what they're seeing and build an attack approach, an attack strategy out of that? So reconnaissance, very important attack tool, but as a defender, what do the bad guys know about me? What can they find out with a couple of Google searches? And you might not be able to stop it being out there, but at least you can know it's out there and you can be prepared to defend against it. That's the deck. Next week, scanning enumeration and gaining access. Over to you, Shane.
Okay, we've got
a couple of questions.
5, 6 questions, which is great.
Yep.
What about evidence collection? Wouldn't you want to maintain evidence for law enforcement before you actually rebuild your systems? What evidence would you need to provide, particularly
Very good
legal
questions.
changes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, digital forensics is its own discipline. Certainly, there is a lot of traditional law enforcement forensic evidentiary requirements that have a digital component. So systems that are suspected of compromise, yes, as a defender, you may want to isolate and not touch because you may want law enforcement to then get on those systems and forensically analyze them. And yes, having intact information that's unmolested may be very important. So part of the response plan for a mature security operations center may be, in the event of a breach, isolate, but don't delete or restore. So that could be a strategy that the organization has if that is something that they want to have a solid chain of custody for any evidence that's part of that. So yes, absolutely.
Suppose backup's not available, how likely are we to be able to fix a system PC which is infected by ransomware?
Yeah, look, well, it's the best recovery approach. There has been evidence of companies coming back from a severe ransomware attack without good backups. It's incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult. There are plenty of companies who haven't. A lot of companies have gone to the wall after ransomware. Some ransomware gets broken. Some is the keys are released. The one that I will talk about in a couple of weeks' time is a neutered strain of ransomware. So sometimes they are broken, and sometimes ransoms can be paid, and the keys are released. Although law enforcement and government agencies will recommend you don't encourage ransomware crews by paying ransoms, but it does occur, and sometimes that results in ransomware being undone with the keys. So the business model can work, but it's still not the official recommended way of doing anything. So
I think there was an article last week or the week before saying that quite a number of large companies have actually paid up in Australia.
yeah, look, it's actually it's something that you'll discuss at the board level. It'll be a strategy. Do we pay or don't we pay? Yes, the ACSC, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, say don't pay. But as the board looking after a company, what's our strategy? Maybe
Yeah.
we do want to pay. We want risk mitigation, so let's pay. But it's not a guarantee, right? You still could lose your data. So yeah, it's a dicey area.
A friend of mine had worked in a big architectural practice, and they got hit by ransomware, I think 4 to 6 times in about a 2 year period. And it was a
Right.
medium-sized company, maybe 150 people, something like that. I think they never paid. They just had good backups every time.
Right,
They
right.
lost
I
a
would
day or
be,
two of data.
I'd be looking at root cause. Why the heck would they get ransomware that many times? Who
Uh,
was clicking on links?
Idiot directors. It's
Right. Yeah. There's always a special case, and it's often the most senior and exposed people that are the special people who no, they can't possibly have the standard laptop. They've got to have a special laptop without all those stupid agents running, and they're the ones that get ransomware. So yeah.
as was described to me recently, most company directors, old white guys who get their children to fix their phone for them because that's their.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think that is not far from the truth in just about every case. Uh,
Um,
couple more
yeah.
questions?
Yeah, if endpoint protection is already implemented, is it still considered best practice to perform network vulnerability testing? How frequently would you recommend conducting this?
First part of the question, we talked about a principle that would say yes, and that is defense in depth. Don't assume endpoint protection is going to work. It should work to some degree, and it will help, but it won't be perfect. So scan your network, scan your firewalls, make sure they're up to date, patch everything, do your endpoint protection, check your logs, create those layers of defense in depth. I mean, nothing is perfect and everything is fallible. Everything might fail. So every defense you can bring is worth considering. I mean, 100 layers of defense is probably overkill and no one can afford it, but you want to have multiple layers and multiple types of defense. So endpoint, network, perimeter, application level, infrastructure level, etc. So yes, you still should. In terms of frequency, most vulnerability scanning practices that I've been aware of are either continuous, so they rotate through their application fleet continuously, and in a large organization, say a bank, they might have 2,500 applications and maybe 100,000 endpoints. So you're going to be getting around to everything maybe every couple of months, but it's a continuous process. It never stops. Small organization where you've got, maybe a small environment, you might do it, once a month, once a week, depends on how much you want to pay and how much effort you want to expend. But obviously the more the better, because exploits change every day. Patches are released every month or every week or every day. So it doesn't take long for a system to drift from a secure baseline. And there's always the risk of what we call 0 days, bugs that the vendors don't know about yet that attackers might have. So yeah, keep scanning as often as you can afford to scan.
What's the practice of writing code that can identify illegal user input?
Yes, very important for web security. So we don't go into that in this particular short course, but most user-driven application vulnerability, certainly in web applications, is all about unsanitized input. So applications accepting users' input, not checking that it's valid and legal and doesn't contain scripts or anything nefarious, and passing it through to the back end and the attacker's profit. So there's a million languages, and all languages have different ways of working around that. There are some pretty fundamental principles. The best resource for that is going to be something like OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a global collective. They have a great site with a lot of resources. There is an input validation cheat sheet, which talks about exactly that. The principles, the approaches, the practices, how to test for it, how to stop it from occurring. But it's a really important part of all system development capabilities. You must sanitize, check, validate your inputs. Always assume the user is an attacker and give them, again, least privilege, need to know, only the access of what they need. If they shouldn't be passing through angled brackets with script written inside it to pass script tags, don't let them do it. Reject that input. Don't pass it through to the back end. So critical defensive mechanism. OWASP is probably the best resource as a starting point to learn that.
Great. I've closed off the questions because we've hit 8:30, but we've got 3 still to answer. You were just talking about 0 days. Can you explain? I hear about 0-day attacks. Is this the same thing and what are they?
Yeah, so 0 day is a term applied to pretty much, think of it this way. When a vendor like Microsoft releases an advisory saying there's a bug in Windows, that's day one. So that's the first day that the world and the vendor acknowledge and understand that there is a bug in a product. So it's really the starting gun for anyone who wants to attack that system, because within a few days, hopefully a week or 2 weeks, the vendor has released a fix and most people have applied it. They won't, because there are plenty of attacks that occur on 20-year-old vulnerabilities that nobody's patched. But that's the theory. Day one is the release. And hopefully about day 14 is the day that everything's fixed and it's no longer vulnerable. Yeah, I live in fantasy land. I like to think. Day 0 is the day before release. So at any time before the vendor knows that their product is vulnerable, so there's no public knowledge, if it's a bug that can be exploited, it's called a 0-day flaw, a 0-day bug. So an attack that exploits a flaw that is not acknowledged or publicly known, acknowledged by the vendor or publicly known to the community, is technically a 0-day flaw. So it's an unacknowledged, certainly unpatched, but unacknowledged flaw. That's really the core, the crux of the definition of a 0-day.
Okay. Was the CrowdStrike outage a hack?
Good question. Oh, which CrowdStrike outage you
I
talking
assume the
about? I
big
might
one.
not
It
get
doesn't
that.
say here, but the
Yeah, possibly. CrowdStrike, pretty competent security mob. Yeah, but hey, security people are often the first ones to fail. Plenty of security products, like a lot of Cisco firewalls, have had hard-coded credentials out of the factory, which have provided backdoors for attackers. So can't tell you with any authority, but potentially, yes, I'd need to do some reading.
I
Um,
thought it was an upgrade that went awry.
uh, are we talking? Are you thinking SolarWinds or CrowdStrike? Could be an upgrade. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I don't have the latest CrowdStrike
There we go.
issue front of mind,
Daniel
unfortunately.
says it was a bad upgrade.
Bad upgrade. There you go.
Messed
Yeah.
up Windows system files. Upgrades are what we always love
Yes,
as a user on the
absolutely.
other
Yeah.
end.
Yep. Yep. Don't.
Okay, well, let's end off with the future. What about AI hackers? Where are they at there? Have you
Yeah,
encountered some?
that's a good one. Look, I'm sure that there's obviously AI generated tools and techniques in use today. There has been a competition that's been run by the Department of Defense in the US for many years, which is fully automated attack and defense. So if you think of red team, blue team exercises with people sitting at screens, about 15 years ago, a competition started where it wasn't the people gave the machines bots, and the bots had to attack and the bots had to defend. So it was hands off to the humans, and they had to write the software that performed the attacks and the defenses. This is well before the current AI phenomenon was even really thought of. Machine learning was a thing, but because obviously these bots were fundamental, rudimentary machine learning things. But that was 15 years ago. I guarantee you that right now, and I can't think of an example, but there would be automated bots that are scanning for vulnerabilities, both on systems to construct exploits and also live scanning the internet and exposed systems that are fully backed by language models. Machine learning systems that are learning as they go. So yeah, it is a thing. It's probably not obvious that it's happening because at the end of the day, the breach is the breach. The exploit is the exploit, whether it was performed or invented by artificial intelligence or real intelligence. Even the humans are going to be using these artificial means to create, optimize, deliver and learn from the actions of the bots doing the exploiting. So yeah, it's definitely a thing, and it will become more of a thing. And yeah, as I said before, it's cat and mouse. We've got machine learning in our defensive systems. We're going to have machine learning absolutely in our attacking systems as well. At some point, I guess it's step back and let the machines fight it out, but it's not quite Skynet just yet, but you never know. Probably not too far away.
Great. Well, on that note, on that cheery note, let's close
Yes.
down for the evening. Thank you so much for everybody's participation. It's been great to see everybody along. I must also give a huge thanks to Lil for being there on the chat, and apologies for not introducing you in the beginning, Lil. People have seen you there who don't know you. But and of course, thanks everybody for coming along, and particularly to you, Simon. It's been a really good session. I'm looking forward to next week.
Cool.
And
All right, me too.
we'll see you all next week, same time, same bat channel, as they used to say. And over to you. Don't forget to go to the forums and participate, chat amongst yourselves, swap some information about. The quiz is now open as well for this week, and we'll see you all very soon.
See you next week.
Bye.
Thanks all.